Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Biola Alabi.
I'm Tundra Abiola.
I'm Veronica Odeka.
Our next guest, Megan Chapman, is co-director of advocacy group Justice and Empowerment Initiatives, a group that seeks to empower poor and marginalized individuals to lead the changes that they would like to see in their own communities, whether greater access to justice for the poor, pro-poor urban governance and policy, or community-led upgrading and development. It also seeks to bring technical expertise in law, advocacy, urban planning, creative media, and community organizing to inform, strengthen, and support efforts to solve justice and development problems. Megan Chapman also consults for a number of similarly minded organizations like Global Rights, Partners for Justice, and the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative. She was staff attorney to Socio-Economic and Economic Rights Action Center Consultative Group to Assist the Poor and World Bank. And she is here to talk about Nigeria's widening socioeconomic gap. Welcome to the program, Megan. It's such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we heard your lengthy bio. For people at home, can you just quickly tell us what you do, why you do it, and how you got here to Nigeria to be doing this work?
Sure. Thank you so much. That's a very long bio. Put a lot of those things to the side. I think the most important thing is that from all the work that I've done in different places and all the places that I've worked, Nigeria has always been the most compelling place for me. And that's why about 8 years ago, I decided to move full-time to Nigeria to work with urban poor communities here in Lagos and in Port Harcourt, which are the two places in Nigeria where we're primarily working. The work that I do here in Lagos especially is hand in hand with urban poor communities. That's slum communities, informal settlements, places like Makoko, Ajegunle, Badia, different parts of the city. And in fact, right now, my organization is the supporting NGO working in partnership with a community-based movement called the Nigerian Slum and Informal Settlement Federation. It's a grassroots movement of the urban poor, people leading their own struggle for the kinds of changes that they want to see in their city. And that federation is active in 144 informal settlements around Lagos. So what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? Our office is like a community center. People come in when they have problems that relate to legal issues. They come in when they have a problem where they want to try to find a development solution. For example, we have programs around sanitation, where the Federation is helping to build biofill toilets, which are kind of off-grid toilets in communities, helping people to improve sanitation, because we know there's no sewage system around the city of Lagos, despite the fact that we're 23 million people, and in informal settlements, they have to find their own solution to sanitation problems. So the Federation is leading that, and we help to connect them to people with the technical expertise to teach them how to do this and to be able to replicate those toilets across the city and the communities that they have. Legal challenges sometimes relate to forced evictions. We do a lot of work, unfortunately, around demolitions, illegal evictions, and land grab. We've worked on prominent cases, including forced evictions in Badia East, in Otodobame community, which was evicted in 2016 to 2017. These are some of the prominent issues that we work on, and we basically try in everything that we do to find win-win alternatives. So if there's a policy that doesn't work favorably for the urban poor, for example, forced evictions, we try to work with the urban poor to speak to government to talk about alternatives to those policies that are basically anti-poor or undermining the progress of the poor out of poverty.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Can you talk to us more about the forced evictions and the demolitions? Because this government policy resulted in 30,000 Lagosians becoming homeless, and 11 people were killed.
Right.
When the police came and started to shoot in the air, some people jumped into the water and drowned.
Right.
Some were actually shot. What is the current status right now? What is the nature of the work that you did? How far have you been able to advance your advocacy, and what is the current status on that issue?
Yeah, thank you, and I'm so glad you have all this background information on the forced eviction of Otodobame. Maybe to give a bit of background for those who aren't aware, Otodobame was an ancestral fishing settlement, Egun majority community in the heart of Lekki Phase 1. And they were located close to the lagoon. It was a fishing settlement that grew up over time and By 2016, when the evictions began, it was home to more than 30,000 people. The Federation was active there. They had savings groups. They had done profiling, household enumerations to know the population of the place, and that's why we can speak confidently about the population there. Now, sometime in 2016, the state government announced that they wanted to evict all the waterfront communities across the city, which the Federation had data from the profiling and enumerations that they'd done, saying that this was more than 40 communities and a population over 300,000 people, including Otorobambe community, that were at risk of eviction. So what did we do? We worked together with the Federation to mobilize those communities to try to speak to the government about why eviction wasn't the solution, whatever the government's concerns were, if it was environmental concerns, if it was about flood management, if it was about security, different things. The point is that evictions aren't going to actually solve the problem. Unfortunately, the government wasn't ready to listen at that stage, and so the communities joined together and asked us to take a case to court, which we did. We were able to get an injunction saying that evictions should not go forward, but despite the injunction, Otorobambe was demolished between November 2016 and April of 2017. Now, as you rightly said, 30,000 people were rendered homeless. It was incredibly violent. Actually, 11 people died due to drowning, and another 2 were killed by gunshot wounds. And others were actually wounded by gunshot wounds. And so it was a very violent and massive displacement. At the end of the day, the remaining population was chased onto the Lagos Lagoon, into canoes, and the police actually were shooting bullets, tear gas, chasing them away from their ancestral homeland onto the lagoon, and they scattered by force to 16 different waterfront communities around the city. So this is one of the things that we always say, is that when evictions happen, it's not like the poor people who are living in the community leave the city. They just go to a different place. They expand other existing settlements, and they are pushed into further and deeper poverty. And so we're not actually finding solutions to problems when you carry out evictions. So what have we done since that time? The Federation has been active in providing relief materials in the initial stage, and actually there was an immense outpouring of support from Lagosians who saw pictures of what was happening on Twitter, on social media, and actually donated to support people. So we've been able to provide, a small modicum of relief, but not anything up to what they've lost. We actually went further in the court case. We won a judgment against the Lagos state government that said that these evictions were unconstitutional. It was a violation of the right to dignity enshrined in Section 34 of the Nigerian Constitution, and that the people should have been resettled before the eviction was carried out, and there was an order for the government to consult with the people to plan for their resettlement. That order came in June of 2017, and up till now we haven't seen any implementation of that order.
No compensation.
No compensation, no relocation, no relief of any kind. And that's also despite verbal promises from the state government when the people went on protest after the evictions. They were promised, they went into a series of meetings, they were promised resettlement, they were promised some assistance, and nothing came of all those promises and the court order that we have. So essentially, we've tried all the different avenues that exist. It doesn't mean that we can't continue to make noise and to advocate, to take cases to regional human rights forums like the ECOWAS Community Court of Justice. But the question is, why is it that the government is unwilling to obey court orders, unwilling to respect the rule of law? Because those are issues of high concern for all of society. Whether you're living in one of these settlements or not, we should be concerned, and we should be pushing and speaking to our elected leaders about the need to actually change this reality for the people of Otorobambe and for other communities in similar situations.
You're right. I want to know, speaking on the poverty issue that you've mentioned, obviously the 40 communities, we understand that once there's a case of poverty in the country and you displace people without providing adequate housing for them, it just kind of adds more to the problem. And Nigeria has recently been noted as the poverty capital. In a situation like this where government can intervene, I know in the United States, when people are homeless, there are NGOs that are set up, and it works in a program where you're helping one person provides housing, another person does account for people that are homeless, another sector works with furniture and getting jobs, which essentially is the #1 reason why people are displaced and homeless. In a situation like this where the government is not able to step in or does not take responsibility, like you've just rightly said, what is the immediate outcome of how do we move forward and what can be done to actually help these people in the interim that we're waiting for the government to step in?
Well, I think that actually solutions to these kinds of problems have to come in partnership with government. Because the truth is that no matter what we want to do in civil society, NGOs can never make up for the huge gap between where people were when they were living in a community like Otodobame and where they are today when they're homeless, they've lost many of their livelihoods, they have lost the wealth that they had accumulated in their communities. So there's really nothing that we can do in civil society, and there isn't the kind of robust social service network here in Lagos that you see in United States cities. It just simply doesn't exist. When we talk about shelters for homeless people, I'm aware of about 2 shelters for victims of domestic violence, but not for people who are just homeless.
Yes, homeless.
And so when you see informal settlements, when you see slums cropping up, it's because people who are otherwise homeless have to do for themselves. They can't afford housing in the formal sector. They can't afford a house even in Botemeta or Sabo or different parts of the city. They can't afford formal sector housing. So what they do for themselves is they find a way to produce housing that's actually affordable and accessible to them. So when we destroy their homes without an alternative, we're basically destroying their wealth, we're destroying their livelihoods, and we're destroying their shelter without any kind of alternative. So what we need to do is first we need to stop evicting people without an alternative. If the government wants to partner with communities to find a way of upgrading their communities, improving the way that people are living, the communities are ready and able to partner, and they are already doing many, many things to improve their own living conditions. Like I mentioned, putting in place community toilets. We have communities that are organizing vigilante to improve, security in their communities. We have communities that are, working with electricity distribution company to find ways of improving access to electricity in their communities. There's so many things that they're doing on their own, but they can't do it entirely on their own. They need support. And when communities are displaced, we have to look at who displaced them and hold those people accountable for finding solutions, because there's no way that, for example, an organization like ours could resettle 30,000 people.
Of course
Yes,
not.
exactly.
We can provide some basic relief, but we
Yes.
can't resettle them.
So Megan, talking about solutions,
Yes.
I mean, on one side, and I mean, even some of the critics of the work that you do have said that, these are people that are in the way of development. Like, these people are being evicted because of development. Lagos has a huge infrastructural challenge. When we talk about solutions and engagement and how to move people, relocate people, how does that dialogue happen? And what are some of the solutions that are best practices in other places?
So basically, when we talk about alternatives to eviction, which is what you're asking about, there's different alternatives. You can resettle people to another place. There
But
can be compensation.
there's no, Lagos is...
I'm coming to that. There's compensation options, but for us, the best practice is called in situ upgrading, which means basically upgrading settlements where people are and planning with the people for whatever else needs to be brought into that place, so that you don't actually have to displace people. There can be temporary relocation within a settlement if you're doing the in situ upgrading in a gradual, incremental way. And this is the best practice that we've seen across all the countries where we've gone to study and do exchanges between the federation here and slum dweller federations in other cities and other countries. This in situ upgrading is something that we're actually in dialogue now with the Lagos State Urban Renewal Agency to try to implement for the first time here in Nigeria. But basically what you do is, you said, land is scarce. You can't just, if you want to start looking for land, you have to go as far as Agboa or, towards Epe or something like this. And
Most
that's so
people don't
far
wanna
that
move too
people,
far.
exactly, they can't access their livelihoods. So you're displacing them economically, and it's not really a viable life, which means they'll still come back. So we try to keep people where they are. We try to respect the existing social and economic fabric of communities. And then we try to find win-win solutions. I mentioned that before.
Yes.
If the government comes to the table, the community comes to the table, different civil society, we can even bring in development partners like the World Bank or other NGOs, the Agence Française pour le Développement. There's different options. You bring different people to the table and you say, okay, you can bring in private developers as well. Private developers could do a part of this, could be involved to make it scalable. The international, development partners could help to subsidize to make sure that whatever the resulting housing is going to actually, be affordable for people. And the people themselves have resources they can mobilize. We just have to recognize that it's on a scale that works.
It's obviously not a luxury hotel. If you're trying to build a luxury hotel in a waterfront and you have people that are already there.
Exactly. So there has to be compromise, basically.
We're going to be interviewing next one of the candidates for Lagos State Governor.
Okay.
What would be some of the questions, especially with some of the judgments and some of the lack of action that you've seen on the current case that some of these settlements have? What are some of the questions you would like to hear someone that is going to be leading Lagos with the disparities we're facing, with the infrastructural challenges we're having, with the shortage of housing that we have? What are some of the questions that you would like them to answer, especially when it has to do with your work?
Absolutely. I have so many. So if you're ready, I'll give you...
We'll take one or two.
Okay, so the first one I would ask is this governor candidate willing to make a commitment to end forced evictions and not to carry out forced evictions of the urban poor, but to work with the urban poor to find win-win solutions? That's number one. The second one is for those who've been displaced by previous governments that are still waiting, where there's been massive violations of the rule of law, are they ready to find a solution to those problems? Are they ready to resettle the people of Otorobame, especially, the people of Badia East who've been displaced by the previous regimes? Are they willing to make a break with the past and actually demonstrate that they're ready to find solutions? And I know that those communities are ready to dialogue with the incoming government to find solutions. So are they ready to work towards that? That's basically, those are the two questions that are the most burning. I have so many others, but those are the most burning.
Now, just before we have to wrap up, I want to get a bit personal with you.
Sure.
Some of what you're describing reminds me of Sisyphus, who rolls that big rock up the hill and it rolls back down. Because the saying is, the poor will always be amongst us. What drives you to continue on this lifetime of pro-poor advocacy? We read your lengthy bio. This is what you've dedicated your life to.
Yes.
How are you able to do this and continue to do it?
It's not like it's easy every day. But I made a commitment that I wanted to focus first in one place and work with people to see a gradual incremental change over the course of my career. And that place is primarily Lagos, elsewhere in Nigeria. We're also in Cotonou now. That is a commitment that I made to spend the rest of my career working here as long as I'm allowed to stay. And what gives me the strength on a day-to-day basis is the people that I work with. Because they are so strong. They are so resilient. Everyone talks about resilience these days. It's the buzzword. And we talk about, fancy ways of promoting resilience. The truth is that the urban poor, the people living in the communities where we work, are the most resilient people I've ever met. They can manage anything. It can flood up to here, and they still continue their lives. They build Paco bridges, they use car doors as boats, and they manage to get around despite flooding. They can survive after a forced eviction. They can find a way to move forward. They can still smile. They can still laugh. And that resilience is a reminder, I think, to all of us that whatever we're suffering in our lives, we can also continue. And if we're tired, we just have to, find something that gives us strength to continue the next day.
Wow. Thank you so much for being here and for inspiring us. I think your work is inspirational.
It truly is.
Thank you
so much for your service.
Yeah, and thank you for having us here, and we're happy to always share more.
We will convey your questions.
Please do, and I'll be watching to see the response, and I know there's millions of other Lagosians out there watching for the response as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.